At an elegant charity gala, Vivian Ward stood among 500 guests when her 10-year-old daughter suddenly rolled across the polished dance floor in her wheelchair. Claire's small hand reached toward the janitor mopping nearby. "Would you dance with me?" she asked, her voice cutting through the crystal silence. The entire ballroom held its breath, including Vivian, whose heart stopped at what she was about to witness. Logan Hayes had learned to move through the world quietly. At 40, his calloused hands told stories of hard work and harder losses, each line a testament to the kind of man who cleaned up after other people's celebrations while nursing his own broken dreams. Tonight was no different from dozens of others, another glittering fundraiser at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, another evening of invisible labor while the city's elite raised glasses to causes they'd forget by morning. He pushed his mop across the marble floor with practiced efficiency, his movements choreographed by years of staying out of the way, of being present but unseen. The music swelled from the ballroom as couples swayed beneath chandeliers that cost more than Logan made in a year, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of privilege that had become the soundtrack to his working nights. He'd been a different man once, before life taught him that dreams were luxuries he couldn't afford. The rhythm called to something deep in his chest, something he'd buried so completely he'd almost forgotten it existed. Almost. His daughter Sarah had loved to dance, spinning in their tiny kitchen while he made breakfast, her laughter the soundtrack to a life that felt, for a brief moment, full of possibility. She would count out the steps he'd taught her, her small feet following patterns he'd learned in college when he thought his future lay in movement and healing rather than maintenance and solitude. That was before the accident, before the long, hollow years that followed, before he learned that survival sometimes meant forgetting who you used to be, piece by piece, until only the essential functions remained. Logan had become an expert in essential functions work, sleep, repeat. Nothing extra, nothing that might reopen wounds that had taken years to scar over. Claire Ward had been watching him for 20 minutes. From her position at the edge of the dance floor, she observed the way his shoulders moved in time with the distant music, how his eyes softened when he thought no one was looking. At 10 years old, she possessed the particular wisdom that comes from living in a body that doesn't cooperate, from being the object of whispered conversations and careful smiles. She recognized something in Logan's careful invisibility, something that matched the feeling of being seen but not really known. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "People will stare, sweetheart. They don't mean to be cruel, but they don't understand." But this man wasn't staring. He was simply there, moving through space with a gentleness that spoke of someone who understood what it meant to be fragile. The ballroom sparkled around them, 500 guests dressed in their finest, diamonds catching light like captured stars. Claire had attended dozens of these events, always positioned carefully at tables, designed to maximize her comfort while minimizing disruption to the evening's flow. She'd learned to smile politely when strangers approached with the particular expression adults wore when they wanted to demonstrate their compassion for someone they pitied. She'd perfected the art of gracious responses to questions about her condition, her prognosis, her attitude in the face of such challenges. But tonight felt different. Tonight, watching Logan move with unconscious grace while remaining somehow separate from the celebration around him, Claire felt a recognition that had nothing to do with medical conditions or social hierarchies. Vivian Ward stood 20 feet away, engaged in conversation with the hospital's chief administrator about their latest research initiative. She was explaining the potential for breakthrough treatments in pediatric spinal cord injuries when she noticed Claire's wheelchair beginning to move. At first, Vivian assumed her daughter was simply repositioning herself for a better view of the string quartet, perhaps seeking relief from the intensity of adult conversation that had surrounded their table all evening. But Claire continued rolling, her destination becoming clear as she approached the area where hotel staff worked quietly to maintain the evening's seamless operation. "Would you dance with me?" The words reached Vivian's ears just as they reached everyone else's, carried across the marble expanse with startling clarity. Vivian felt her breath catch, her conversation with the administrator trailing off mid-sentence. Around her, 500 conversations stuttered to a halt. A waiter paused with his tray of champagne, crystal glasses catching the light like frozen music. The string quartet's melody seemed to hover, waiting. Logan looked at Claire, really looked at her, and Vivian saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. Recognition rather than pity, curiosity rather than discomfort. "I'm not much of a dancer anymore," he said softly, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the nearest guests. Neither am I. Claire's smile was radiant with honesty. But maybe we could figure it out together. Vivian's grip tightened on her champagne glass, her knuckles white against the crystal. She'd spent 3 years learning to anticipate every possible risk, every potential disappointment that might await Claire in a world not designed for her needs. This moment contained so many variables she couldn't control, so many opportunities for humiliation or harm. Her security training screamed at her to intervene, to extract Claire from this unscripted interaction before it could develop into something that might damage either her daughter's dignity or the family's reputation. But something in Claire's expression held her back. Her daughter's face showed no uncertainty, no fear of rejection or embarrassment. Instead, Claire looked exactly as she had before the accident, completely present, unguarded, willing to risk disappointment for the possibility of connection. Vivian realized she hadn't seen that expression in 3 years. Logan set down his mop with deliberate care. He walked to Claire, his work boots silent against the marble, and offered his hand with the kind of courtesy reserved for royalty. "It would be my honor," he said, and meant it completely. What followed wasn't dancing in any traditional sense. Logan took Claire's hands and began to sway, his movements slow and deliberate, letting her set the pace. Claire closed her eyes and let the music fill the spaces between her heartbeats. They moved together not gracefully, not perfectly, but with an authenticity that made the elaborate choreography happening around them seem artificial by comparison. Logan's years of training surfaced instinctively, not in complex steps but in his understanding of how bodies could communicate without words, how movement could become a language of its own. Vivian watched from her position among the other guests, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. She'd attended hundreds of these events, had perfected the art of gracious networking while keeping Claire's needs carefully balanced. But she'd never seen her daughter look so completely present, so unguarded in her joy. The ballroom gradually returned to its celebration, but something had shifted. People glanced over with expressions that weren't quite pity, weren't quite admiration, something softer, more complicated. The next morning arrived gray and unremarkable, the kind of Tuesday that felt designed to erase the magic of the night before. Logan reported to work early, as always, his mind still replaying those precious minutes on the dance floor. The hotel's service corridors were quiet, populated only by the invisible army of workers who maintained the illusion of effortless luxury for guests who rarely acknowledged their existence. He was surprised when his supervisor appeared, clipboard in hand and an expression that suggested either trouble or opportunity. "Logan, there's someone here to see you, conference room B." Vivian Ward sat at the polished table like she belonged there, which Logan supposed she did. He'd looked her up after the gala. Everyone knew the Ward family, their pharmaceutical empire built on the kind of generosity that bought hospital wings and university buildings. Ward Pharmaceuticals had revolutionized treatments for rare childhood diseases, had funded research that had given hope to thousands of families facing impossible diagnoses. Up close, she was smaller than he'd expected, her composure perfect but somehow brittle, like expensive china that had been repaired so expertly the cracks were invisible but still present. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I wanted to thank you for last night. Claire hasn't stopped talking about it." Logan remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "No thanks necessary, ma'am. Your daughter is special." "Yes, she is." Vivian's smile was complicated, threaded with pride and worry in equal measure. "Which is why I have a proposition for you." She slid a folder across the table, its leather binding embossed with the Ward family crest. Logan didn't touch it, though he could see enough to know it contained official documents, legal language, the kind of paperwork that transformed human connections into business arrangements. "I've done some research, Mr. Hayes. You have a background in dance therapy, impressive credentials from before." She paused delicately. "Before your personal circumstances changed. Claire needs someone who understands both movement and healing. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous contract to work with her privately." The number on the contract was staggering. Logan stared at it, thinking of his cramped apartment, his aging car, the bills that accumulated faster than his ability to pay them. This amount could change everything, could give him back the life he'd lost, could restore possibilities he'd abandoned when grief made ambition seem like betrayal of his daughter's memory. "I appreciate the offer," he said finally, "but I can't accept it." Vivian's composure cracked slightly. "I'm sorry?" What happened last night, it can't be bought. It was real because it had nothing to do with money or contracts or obligations. The moment I take your check, it becomes something else entirely. Mr. Hayes, you don't understand. Claire has been through multiple therapists, specialists, programs. Nothing has worked the way those 5 minutes with you worked. Logan's voice remained gentle but firm. Maybe that's because they were trying to fix her instead of seeing her. The words hung between them like a challenge. Vivian felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She'd spent 3 years since the accident that changed Claire's life consulting experts, researching treatments, controlling every variable she could identify. She'd become a master at managing her daughter's condition while somehow losing sight of her daughter herself. The best pediatric specialists in the country had evaluated Claire, had designed treatment protocols based on the latest research, had provided her with every advantage money and influence could secure. "What are you suggesting?" Vivian asked, though she suspected she already knew. Logan reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn business card, its edges soft with handling. The Riverside Community Center's logo was simple, hand-drawn, the kind of unprofessional design that spoke of volunteer enthusiasm rather than corporate polish. "There's a community center downtown. We run a dance program for kids with different abilities. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 to 7:30. No contracts, no payment, just kids being kids. I can't simply send Claire to some community program. There are security concerns, liability issues, insurance considerations." "Of course there are." Logan's interruption was gentle but unmistakable, but maybe those aren't the only concerns that matter. Vivian looked at the business card as if it contained a foreign language. The address was in a part of the city she knew only in the abstract, the kind of neighborhood where her charity work sent checks but never required her physical presence. The idea of Claire in such an environment, uncontrolled, unmonitored, surrounded by children whose backgrounds and conditions were completely unknown, triggered every protective instinct she'd developed since becoming a single mother to a disabled child. "Mr. Hayes, I think you misunderstand our situation. Claire's needs are complex, specialized. She requires what every kid requires. The chance to try things, to fail safely, to discover what she's capable of without everyone watching to see if she'll break." Behind them, neither adult noticed Claire's wheelchair positioned just outside the conference room door, her 10-year-old ears absorbing every word of a conversation about her future that didn't include her voice. She'd arrived early for a follow-up appointment with the hotel's catering manager about dietary accommodations for future events, but had been drawn by the sound of familiar voices discussing topics that directly concerned her life. That evening, Claire sat in her bedroom while her mother worked late in the home office, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing through their penthouse like expensive rain. The business card Logan had given them lay on her nightstand, its edges soft with wear. She'd memorized the address, looked it up on the tablet her mother thought was locked down to educational sites only. Claire had become expert at navigating around the digital boundaries designed to protect her from the internet's dangers, not out of rebellion, but from a hunger for information about the world beyond her carefully curated existence. The Riverside Community Center was 12 miles away, close enough to reach, far enough to matter. The neighborhood looked different from her usual destinations, its buildings older and less polished, its sidewalks populated by people who walked rather than drove, who carried their belongings in worn bags rather than designer accessories. Claire had never taken a taxi alone, never made a decision about her own care without committees of adults weighing the risks and benefits. But something about Logan's invitation felt different from the careful choreography of her usual days. She'd been thinking about the dance all week, replaying those moments when movement had felt natural rather than therapeutic, when her wheelchair had been simply part of the choreography rather than a limitation to be overcome. Her regular physical therapy sessions were efficient and well-intentioned, but they focused on measurable progress toward predetermined goals. Logan's approach had been different, less concerned with what she couldn't do than curious about what might be possible. The next Thursday, she called the taxi from her bathroom, speaking in whispers while her mother took a work call in the next room. The dispatcher was professional but uncurious, accepting her request for wheelchair-accessible transportation to an address in a part of town that clearly surprised him. Claire had practiced the conversation, had prepared explanations for questions that might arise, but the transaction was simpler than her anxiety had anticipated. The driver was a woman named Rosa, who asked no questions when Claire directed her to pick up her wheelchair from the building's concierge and helped her into the back seat with practiced efficiency. Rosa had been driving for 23 years, had transported thousands of passengers with varying needs and destinations, and had learned that the best service often involved respectful silence rather than intrusive curiosity. "You sure about this address, sweetheart?" Rosa asked as they pulled up to the community center, its brick facade modest and welcoming in the early evening light. "Very sure," Claire said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The building was smaller than she'd expected, its entrance marked by hand-painted signs advertising various programs and activities. Through the large windows, she could see people moving around inside, not the careful, measured movements of medical environments, but the casual flow of people engaged in activities they enjoyed. Children were visible among the adults. Their ages and abilities varied, their presence suggesting this was a place where differences were accommodated rather than spotlighted. Logan was setting up folding chairs when he saw her wheel through the door, and his smile was worth every moment of doubt she'd experienced during the ride over. The room smelled like floor wax and possibility, its mirrors reflecting not judgment but simple acknowledgement. The space was clearly multi-purpose. Basketball hoops folded against walls suggested it served as a gymnasium during other hours, while the sound system appeared to be volunteer-maintained rather than professionally installed. "Claire, you came." He walked over, no surprise in his voice, no questions about permissions or protocols. "Ready to be tonight's music director?" Around them, other children were arriving, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, some whose challenges weren't immediately visible but who carried themselves with the particular caution of people who'd learned not to expect the world to accommodate them. Claire had never been in a room where she wasn't the only one who was different, where adaptive equipment and modified movements were simply part of the landscape rather than special considerations requiring explanation. "What do you mean, music director?" she asked. "Tonight, you get to choose what we dance to. Everyone gets a turn, but since it's your first time, you're in charge." Claire thought for a moment, then requested something slow and sweet, the kind of music her father used to hum when she was very small, before the accident that had changed everything. Logan nodded and queued up a melody that seemed to wrap around the room like arms, its rhythm gentle enough to accommodate any pace, complex enough to reward attention. What followed was nothing like the physical therapy sessions that had filled Claire's calendar for the past 3 years. Logan moved among the children like a gardener, offering suggestions rather than corrections, celebrating effort over outcome. When Claire fell attempting a turn, no one rushed to help her up. They simply waited while she figured out how to right herself, then applauded when she managed it. The other children treated her wheelchair as they might treat any other piece of equipment useful for certain purposes, irrelevant for others, neither shameful nor heroic. "There's no wrong way to move," Logan told the group as they practiced basic patterns, "only ways we haven't tried yet." For the first time in memory, Claire forgot to be careful. She forgot to monitor her mother's expression for signs of worry, forgot to calculate the risk of each movement before attempting it. She simply moved, and in moving, discovered muscles and confidence she'd forgotten she possessed. The other children accepted her efforts without either condescension or excessive praise, treating her successes and failures with the same casual acknowledgement they offered each other. An hour and a half later, she was exhausted and exhilarated, her hair damp with sweat and her smile so wide it made her cheeks ache. The other children were gathering their things, their parents or caregivers appearing with the reliable punctuality of people whose schedules revolved around managing the complex needs of their charges. But there was an ease to these interactions that differed from the careful orchestration of Claire's usual activities. Claire waited until the room was nearly empty before asking Logan the question that had been building in her chest all evening. "Can I stay a little longer? My ride isn't coming for 20 minutes. Logan glanced around the empty room, then back at Claire. "Of course. Want to work on that turn that's been giving you trouble?" From the parking lot, Vivian Ward sat in her car, her phone pressed to her ear as she conducted a conference call with investors in Tokyo. She'd followed the taxi, her security training overriding her desire to trust. She'd been prepared to intervene if necessary, to sweep in and extract Claire from whatever well-meaning but inadequate situation she'd discovered. Her security team had briefed her on the neighborhood's demographics, the community center's funding sources, the liability issues that might arise from unregulated programming. Instead, she found herself watching through the community center's large windows as her daughter laughed not the polite, careful laughter of their social obligations, but the full-throated joy of a child who'd forgotten to be fragile. Claire was attempting the same movement over and over, falling and rising with determination that took Vivian's breath away. Logan's presence was steady but unobtrusive, offering support when needed but allowing Claire to discover her own capabilities without interference. The call from Tokyo continued in her ear, numbers and projections and quarterly forecasts, the familiar language of business that had structured her life since David's death. But Vivian's attention was entirely captured by the sight of her daughter discovering what she was capable of when no one was managing her experience for her. Claire's movements were unguarded, experimental, joyful in ways that her carefully supervised therapy sessions had never achieved. When Claire finally emerged from the building, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright, Vivian was waiting by the taxi, having ended her call mid-sentence for the first time in her professional life. "Mom?" Claire's voice was small, uncertain. "I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," Vivian said softly. "But next time, maybe we could arrange this together?" 3 weeks into what had become Claire's routine, the video appeared online. Someone with a phone had captured the moment from the charity gala, the footage grainy but unmistakable, a janitor and a disabled child swaying together while a ballroom of wealthy strangers watched. The caption read, "When humanity shows up in unexpected places." The video's popularity seemed to tap into something deeper than simple sentimentality, sparking conversations about class, dignity, and the ways people connected across social boundaries. Within 48 hours, the clip had been viewed 2 million times. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as either heartwarming human interest or troubling breach of social boundaries, depending on their editorial perspective. Opinion pieces appeared analyzing the implications of the moment, some celebrating it as evidence of American democratic values, others questioning the appropriateness of such public displays across class lines. Logan's background emerged in fragments: the dance therapy degree, the daughter who died in a car accident 7 years earlier, the slow dissolution of a life built around someone who was no longer there. Reporters found his former colleagues, his daughter's teachers, neighbors who remembered him from before grief had reduced his world to essential functions. The coverage was relentless in its hunger for context, for narrative threads that could transform a simple moment of connection into a story with clear heroes and villains. The attention was overwhelming and invasive. Reporters appeared at Logan's apartment building, at the community center, at the hotel where he worked. They wanted sound bites about healing and hope, wanted to package their story into something digestible and inspiring. They wanted Logan to be either a saint or a cautionary tale, but he refused to be reduced to either narrative. His responses to their questions were polite but unhelpful, offering no dramatic revelations or inspirational messaging that might fuel additional coverage. At Ward Pharmaceuticals, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The company's stock price had fluctuated with each new development in what the media had dubbed the Janitor and the Heiress. Board members who'd never met Claire spoke about protecting the company's reputation, about the liability of association with someone whose background included such obvious instability. The pharmaceutical industry was particularly sensitive to public perception, given the ongoing scrutiny of drug pricing and corporate responsibility. "The optics are problematic," said Harrison Webb, the company's longtime chairman, a Ward family member involved with service staff, particularly given the circumstances. "It raises questions about judgment, about the family's ability to maintain appropriate boundaries." Other board members nodded in agreement, their concerns focused on market response and investor confidence. The Ward family's personal tragedy was regrettable, but the company's responsibility was to its shareholders, its employees, its stakeholders who depended on stable leadership and sound decision-making. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table, her spine straight and her expression unreadable. She'd built her career on the ability to compartmentalize, to separate emotional decision-making from business strategy. The board expected her to distance herself and Claire from Logan, to issue a statement about inappropriate media attention and return to the careful choreography of their previous life. They expected her to prioritize the company's reputation over personal considerations, to demonstrate the kind of leadership that put institutional stability above individual relationships. Instead, she stood. "Gentlemen, I've spent 3 years trying to give my daughter the best possible care, the most qualified professionals, the most advanced treatments. In 3 weeks with Logan Hayes, She's made more progress, not just physically, but emotionally than in all our previous efforts combined. Vivian, we understand your perspective as a mother, but number. Her voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. You don't understand. You understand market research and focus groups and quarterly projections. But you don't understand what it means to watch your child discover she's capable of joy. The room fell silent. Board members who'd worked with Vivian for years had never seen her challenge their collective authority so directly. She'd always been diplomatic, strategic, willing to compromise for the greater good of the organization. Vivian continued, her voice steady but threaded with steel. If being associated with someone who sees my daughter as a whole person rather than a liability damages our stock price, then perhaps we're in the wrong business. If treating a good man with dignity costs us investors who value reputation over humanity, then those aren't investors we need. She gathered her materials with deliberate care. The board can accept my decision or find a new CEO. But Claire will continue attending her dance classes, and Logan Hayes will continue to be welcome in our lives, regardless of what anyone else thinks about the appropriateness of that arrangement. Meanwhile, Logan faced his own pressures. His supervisor at the hotel, uncomfortable with the media attention, suggested he might be happier in a position that offered less visibility. Coworkers who'd barely acknowledged him for 2 years suddenly had opinions about his involvement with the Ward family. Some were supportive, others suspicious of his motives, wondering if he was using Claire's condition to advance his own circumstances. The hardest conversation came from Claire herself. "Are you going to leave?" she asked after a particularly difficult session where reporters had attempted to follow them into the community center. Logan knelt beside her wheelchair, his eyes level with hers. "Why would you ask that?" "Because everyone does, eventually. When things get complicated or hard or inconvenient," her voice was matter of fact, but Logan could hear the fear underneath. "My dad didn't choose to leave, but he still left. And everyone else who was supposed to stay, they found reasons why they couldn't. 25. "Claire, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "I'm not going anywhere because of reporters or opinions or anything else. If I ever leave, it will be because you ask me to, and for no other reason. Promise." Promise. But even as he said it, Logan wondered if he was making a commitment he could keep. The attention was affecting not just him, but everyone around him. The community center had received threats from people who disapproved of the mixing of social classes, who saw Logan's relationship with Claire as evidence of inappropriate ambition. Claire's schoolmates had begun treating her differently, some with newfound interest, others with resentment about her sudden celebrity status. That night, Logan sat in his small apartment, surrounded by the detritus of his modest life, secondhand furniture, bills organized in careful piles, photographs of Sarah he still couldn't bear to put away. The sensible thing would be to step back, to let the story fade, and allow Claire to return to her carefully managed existence. The kind thing might be to remove himself as a source of complication from her already complex life. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Thank you for keeping your promise. See you Thursday." Logan smiled despite everything. Sometimes the right choice and the easy choice were completely different things. Sometimes keeping a promise to a 10-year-old girl mattered more than protecting yourself from the judgment of strangers who would never understand what it meant to find purpose in an unexpected place. As autumn settled over the city, Logan and Vivian began attending the community center classes together. It started practically Vivian's security concerns about Claire traveling alone, but evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Vivian, who'd spent 3 years choreographing her daughter's recovery from the sidelines, found herself drawn into the circle of participants rather than observers. The other parents were welcoming, but uncurious about her identity, focused on their own children's progress rather than celebrity gossip or social hierarchies. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted to Logan during Claire's first solo attempt at a complex sequence they'd been practicing for weeks. "Do what?" "Not control the outcome, not manage every variable, not..." She gestured helplessly at the room full of children moving with joyful imperfection. "Not fix everything before it has a chance to go wrong." Logan watched Claire execute a turn that would have been impossible 3 months earlier, her face bright with concentration and delight. Around her, other children cheered encouragement, their support genuine and uncomplicated by the careful considerations that usually surrounded Claire's achievements. Maybe the goal isn't to fix everything. Maybe it's just to be present for whatever happens. That's terrifying. Yes, Logan agreed. But look at her. Vivian looked. Claire was laughing with Marcus, a boy with cerebral palsy who'd become her closest friend in the group. They were attempting to synchronize their movements, failing spectacularly, and finding the failure hilarious rather than frustrating. Claire's wheelchair had become not a limitation, but simply part of the choreography, one element among many in a dance that had no predetermined outcome. "She's fearless," Vivian whispered. "She learned it from you." The words surprised them both. Vivian turned to look at Logan, her composure cracking slightly. "From me? I've spent 3 years being afraid of everything, afraid she'd get hurt, afraid she'd be disappointed, afraid other people would judge her or pity her, or afraid you'd lose her the way you lost her father." The sentence hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Vivian's breath caught, her professional armor no match for the gentle directness of Logan's observation. They'd never discussed David's death, had maintained careful boundaries around their personal histories even as their lives had become increasingly intertwined. "She told you about David?" "She told me she missed dancing with him, that you used to dance together, all three of you, in your kitchen on Sunday mornings." Vivian's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 3 years. "We stopped after the accident. I couldn't." Seeing her struggle with movement that used to bring her such joy, it felt cruel to remind her of what she'd lost. What if she hadn't lost it? What if it just looked different now? That evening, after Claire had gone to bed, Vivian found herself in the kitchen of their penthouse, the same kitchen where Sunday morning dances had once been as routine as coffee and newspaper. The space was immaculate, professionally maintained, but somehow sterile in ways it hadn't been when David was alive. She turned on David's playlist songs she hadn't been able to listen to since his death and began to move. Her steps were tentative at first, rusty with disuse and heavy with memory, but gradually the music worked its way into her bones, reminding her body of rhythms it had forgotten. She danced for David, for Claire, for the mother she'd been before fear became her primary parenting strategy. The movements felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, like returning to a language she'd once spoken fluently but hadn't practiced in years. Claire appeared in the doorway, her wheelchair silent on the hardwood floor. "Mom, are you okay?" Vivian wiped her eyes, embarrassed to be caught in such an unguarded moment. "I was just remembering." "Remembering Dad?" "Yes." Claire maneuvered her wheelchair closer. "Will you teach me the song you and Dad used to dance to?" "Sweetheart, we can't really dance the way we used to. We can dance the way we dance now." The wisdom in her daughter's words stopped Vivian completely. She looked at Claire, really looked at her, and saw not the child she'd been before the accident, not the patient she'd become after, but the person she was now, resilient, adaptable, joyful despite everything. "Yes," Vivian said, "we can dance the way we dance now." The next Thursday, Vivian joined the class as a participant rather than an observer. Logan welcomed her with the same gentle encouragement he offered everyone, making no special accommodations for her discomfort or inexperience. She stumbled through basic steps she'd once known by heart, her body relearning how to move without the weight of constant vigilance. The other adults in the class, parents and caregivers and volunteers, accepted her presence without fanfare, focused on their own learning rather than her celebrity status. During a break, while Claire worked with Marcus on their synchronized routine, Logan approached Vivian. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. That night at the gala, when Claire asked me to dance, were you planning to intervene?" Vivian considered the question carefully. "I was prepared to. I had security positioned, exit strategies planned. I was ready to protect her from whatever I thought might happen." "What changed your mind?" I saw her face. Vivian's voice was soft with memory. For just a moment, she looked exactly like she had before the accident. Not careful, not managing herself, just alive. I realized that, in trying to protect her from everything, I'd been protecting her from that feeling too. Logan nodded. "Claire told me something last week. She said she used to think the accident took away her ability to dance. Now she thinks it just gave her a different way to move through the world. She's wise beyond her years. She learned that from you too." Their conversation was interrupted by Claire's excited voice calling them over. She and Marcus had successfully completed their routine, their movements complementary rather than identical, each working within their abilities to create something beautiful together. Other children gathered to watch, offering suggestions and encouragement, their support genuine and uncomplicated. Did you see? Did you see us?" Claire's joy was infectious, spreading through the room like sunlight. Logan and Vivian applauded, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, but a recognition of shared purpose that felt as significant as any declaration. They were both committed to Claire's well-being, but more than that, they were both learning to trust her ability to define that well-being for herself. They were becoming a family in ways that had nothing to do with legal documents or social conventions, connected by their shared investment in Claire's growth and happiness. 1 year after the charity gala that had changed everything, Claire stood for the first time during a dance class. It wasn't dramatic, she'd been working toward it for months with her physical therapist, building strength and confidence in measured increments. Her progress had been documented in charts and reports, celebrated in small victories that accumulated over time. But when the moment came, when she pushed herself up from her wheelchair and took 3 careful steps in time with the music, the entire room held its breath. Logan was there to catch her if she fell, but he didn't reach for her. Vivian was there with her phone, capturing the moment not for social media or medical records, but for the pure joy of witnessing her daughter's triumph. The other children cheered with genuine excitement, their celebration free from the complicated emotions that often accompanied Claire's milestones in other settings. "I did it," Claire whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I actually did it." "You did," Logan confirmed. "How does it feel?" Claire considered the question seriously, her face thoughtful as she processed the sensation of weight on her legs, the different perspective that came with standing height, the way the room looked different from this vantage point. "Different than I thought it would. Good different." After class, as the community center emptied and Logan cleaned up the space, Claire remained with her parents because that's what they'd become. Gradually, and without fanfare, a family unit that defied conventional definition but worked with surprising efficiency. Their relationship had evolved organically, shaped by shared experiences and mutual care rather than legal obligations or social expectations. "Logan," Claire said, her voice carrying the particular seriousness that meant she'd been thinking about something important. "If I can stand now, does that mean I don't need the wheelchair anymore?" Logan finished folding the last chair before answering, his response thoughtful and unhurried. "What do you think it means?" "I think it means I have choices. Some days I might want to walk, some days I might want to roll, some dances might be better sitting, some might be better standing." "That sounds right to me." Claire nodded, satisfied with this analysis. Then, with the abrupt subject change that characterized most 10-year-old conversations, she added, "Can we all dance together now, like a real family?" Vivian felt her breath catch. "Sweetheart, we are a real family. We've been a real family for a while now. But can we dance like one?" Logan looked at Vivian, a question in his eyes. She nodded, and together they formed a small circle around Claire, who remained seated in her wheelchair but reached up to take their hands. They began to move together not to any particular song, just to the rhythm of their shared breathing, their synchronized heartbeats. The movement was simple, unhurried, perfect in its imperfection. There was no music playing in the community center, no audience to impress or judge. Just 3 people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances, learning to move together in ways that honored both their differences and their connection. The silence around them felt full rather than empty, pregnant with possibility rather than weighted with expectation. Claire looked up at both adults, her face radiant with satisfaction. "This feels right," she said simply. Logan found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the unexpected invitation at a charity gala, the gradual building of trust, the way fear had slowly given way to hope. A year ago, he'd been a man moving through the world carefully, protecting himself from further loss by avoiding meaningful connection. Now he was part of something larger than himself, something that had grown organically from a moment of genuine human recognition. Vivian thought about the mother she'd been before David's death, the mother she'd become in her grief and fear, and the mother she was becoming now. She'd spent 3 years trying to control Claire's experience, to anticipate and prevent every possible disappointment or danger. She was learning to trust not just Claire's resilience, but her own ability to be present for whatever came next without trying to orchestrate the outcome. Claire simply enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by people who saw her completely not as a collection of medical conditions or limitations, not as a symbol of inspiration or tragedy, but as a whole person whose thoughts and feelings and choices mattered. She was beginning to understand that family wasn't just about sharing DNA or legal documents, but about choosing to show up for each other day after day, year after year. The janitor, the heiress, and the girl who'd brought them together continued their slow circle, their movements creating a kind of prayer made visible. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, traffic flowing through streets lit by neon and possibility. Inside the Riverside Community Center, a different kind of light filled the space, warm and steady and sufficient for the small miracle of a family that had chosen itself, one careful step at a time. When they finally stopped moving, Claire remained seated between them, her hands still holding theirs. "I love you both," she said, with the directness that only children could manage. "We love you too," Logan and Vivian said simultaneously, then looked at each other with surprise and something that might have been recognition. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. They were a family now, bound not by convention but by choice, not by circumstance but by commitment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the knowledge that some of the most important connections in life arrive not through careful planning but through the simple willingness to say yes when someone unexpected asked you to dance.